You're 24 years old, and one of your videos suddenly blows up. There was no preparation, no long-term plan. It just hit at the right time, with exactly what people were looking for. In the first few days, before you even understand what's happening, the views keep climbing, notifications won't stop, messages keep flooding in, strangers start recognizing you in real life. Then the money starts hitting your account clearly, directly, and not in small amounts, but in numbers big enough to make you rethink the entire way you see life. After 30 days, you make more money than you once believed would take years to earn. 3 months pass, and that number keeps rising. By 6 months, your total income has passed $1 million. Not from slow, steady progress, but from one sudden jump that changes everything around you. You start seeing the world differently. At that same moment, another version of you exists. Same age, same starting point, same income, with no major difference in skill or opportunity. Both of you are standing on the same line, with the same amount of money in your hands. But after that moment, your lives begin to split. Not because of one massive decision, not because of one obvious mistake, but because of very small choices, things that, at the time, made complete sense. One person immediately starts upgrading their life, moving into a better place, spending more freely, enjoying the feeling of finally making it. Everything has a reason. Everything feels deserved after all the work it took to get there. The other person doesn't rush to change too much too fast. They still enjoy the money, but they hold part of it back. They don't let their entire rhythm of life get pulled along by the money that just came in. Nobody is wrong, nobody is right. They are just two different reactions to the exact same situation. 10 years pass. One person has almost completely disappeared. They no longer show up. Nobody talks about them anymore. There is no clear sign that they ever had that money in the first place. The other person is no longer viral, no longer getting attention, but now owns nearly $5 million in assets and no longer depends on any platform to survive. What's important is that nothing dramatic happened in between to explain the difference. There was no crash, no obvious disaster. Everything happened in a very normal way. Reasonable expenses, upgrades that seemed deserved, decisions that you probably would have made too if you were in that position. And because everything made sense in the moment, you don't realize you are moving in a direction that, at some point, will make it impossible to go back to where you started. After that explosive phase, your pace of life starts to slow down. You're no longer growing every single day, but you're still earning far more than the average person. You're not making hundreds of thousands a month like before. Instead, your income now moves somewhere between $12,000 and $18,000 a month, depending on the period. That is not a low number. In fact, it is enough to live comfortably in almost any major city. After taxes and other expenses, you keep around 70%, which means you actually have about $9,000 to $12,000 in your hands each month. If you kept your original lifestyle, your costs would only be around $3,000 to $4,000, including rent, food, transportation, and basic needs. That means every month, you would still have a significant amount left over without having to think too much. But the real issue is not how much you make. The real issue is how you begin adjusting your life after getting used to the feeling of fast money. Because once you have experienced money coming in more easily than before, it becomes very hard to go back to your old standard of living without feeling like something is missing. You start seeing things that once felt luxurious in a completely different way. A bigger apartment no longer feels excessive. A better car no longer feels like a decision you need to think about for too long. Trips are no longer rare rewards. They become a normal part of life. And the important thing is, none of these changes happen all at once. They happen slowly. There is no single moment that makes you stop and ask yourself if you are spending too much. Every step has its own reason. Every upgrade can be explained. At the same time, the other version of you is facing the exact same situation, the same income, the same environment, the same opportunity to change how life looks. But instead of adjusting quickly, you keep most of your original structure in place. You allow yourself to enjoy the money, but with clear limits. You move into a better place, but not beyond what you can control. You spend more comfortably, but you do not turn that spending into a fixed standard. At this stage, the difference is almost impossible to notice from the outside. Both versions of you are living better than before. Both are not under immediate financial pressure. Both feel like they are moving in the right direction. But one thing is changing very slowly, and you do not realize it. Your fixed monthly cost of living. For one person, that number slowly settles at a level that can be controlled in almost any situation. For the other person, it keeps rising over time and starts becoming the new normal. And once a new lifestyle has formed, it is no longer just a choice. It becomes something you feel forced to maintain. Because lowering your lifestyle no longer feels like saving money, it feels like losing something. And that exact moment is when the trajectory starts to take shape, not through one big decision, but through very small adjustments, repeated every month. Each one makes sense at the time, but when you add them up over many years, they create an outcome you can no longer reverse. From that point on, the two versions of you are no longer different only in the way they think. They start becoming different in how they respond to money. Path A sees the money you have as a limited resource, something that may not repeat in the future. So you keep a healthy distance from it. You still spend more comfortably than before, but you do not let your lifestyle rise too quickly. You keep most of the money in a safe position. Part of it sits in an emergency reserve. Part of it is allocated into lower volatility options to reduce the risk of losing value. You are not trying to double your net worth in a short period of time. You are focused on extending your financial control for as long as possible. Meanwhile, Path B sees the exact same money as confirmation that you have entered a new stage of life. This is no longer an experiment. This is now your normal state. You begin adjusting your environment to match your current position. You move into a better living space. You choose a more comfortable way to get around. You spend more freely in your day-to-day life. Not to show off, but because keeping your old lifestyle no longer feels reasonable under your new circumstances. These two perspectives create two different directions. And at the time, it is very hard to say which one is right or wrong. Path A prioritizes staying flexible. You do not let your fixed costs rise too fast because you understand that once a cost becomes a monthly obligation, bringing it back down is very difficult. You keep your spending stable even when your income moves up and down. You do not let good months change the structure of your life. Path B reacts directly to cash flow. When income rises, you allow yourself to spend a little more. When income drops, you still keep most of the same lifestyle because you believe the good phase will come back. This causes your expenses to slowly rise over time, and they begin forming a new standard that you no longer want to reduce. The next difference is in how both versions handle extra income. Path A treats every surplus dollar as a way to strengthen your financial position. You either hold it or allocate it with intention. You do not connect spending money with the emotion of, "I made it." You connect it to a long-term objective. Path B treats that extra income as a reasonable reward for the effort you have put in. You use it to improve your life immediately, and there is nothing wrong with each individual decision. Every choice has a clear reason. Every choice can be explained when you look at it in the short term. But the problem is that those choices start repeating in the same direction. As the months pass, the gap is still very small, just a few hundred to a few $1,000s. Not enough to feel dangerous. Both versions still have money. Both are still living well. Both are under no immediate financial pressure. But the habits have already started forming. Path A gets used to keeping most of what you earn and not letting your lifestyle depend on short-term income. Path B gets used to adjusting life around cash flow and slowly starts seeing the current level of spending as the default standard. There is no moment that forces you to stop and ask if you are moving in the wrong direction. Everything feels smooth. Everything feels reasonable. There is no obvious warning sign. And because it all feels so smooth, you do not realize that from here, the two trajectories have already started pulling away from each other. Not through one major turn, but through tiny adjustments repeated over and over again. A little every month. Small enough to ignore, but repeated long enough to create a difference you may not be able to close later. At this point, the difference is no longer just about mindset. It starts showing up clearly in specific decisions tied directly to money and the structure of your life. Path A enters this stage with one simple rule. Every major expense must be adjustable if needed. You do not refuse to enjoy life, but you design everything in a way that can change if your income drops. You choose to rent a better apartment for around $2,500 a month instead of immediately buying a large asset. You keep most of the remaining money flexible. Around $420,000 is allocated into a broad market fund with the goal of steady long-term growth. Another $200,000 is kept in cash or highly liquid assets to make sure you can maintain your life for years, even if no new income comes in. The rest is used to test other opportunities, but with clear limits. So if they do not work out, they do not damage your entire financial system. You are not trying to maximize short-term returns. You are focused on extending the amount of time you stay in control. Meanwhile, Path B also makes decisions that have their own logic in the current situation. You buy an apartment worth around $650,000 with a large down payment because you can afford it, and you no longer want to keep renting now that you have money. You buy a $100,000 car because you use it every day, and you want a better experience. You spend more on furniture, comfort, and the things that improve your quality of life. From there, your total fixed monthly costs rise to around $13,000, including payments, insurance, maintenance, and living expenses. That number does not create immediate pressure because your income is still enough to cover it. But what changes is that your financial structure starts losing flexibility. You can no longer easily bring your costs down if your income drops, because most of those expenses have now become required obligations. Path A is different. Your expenses stay around $5,500 to $6,500 a month, mostly made up of basic living costs and a few controlled upgrades. You can raise or lower that spending at any time without affecting your core life. The difference keeps showing up in how both versions handle risk. Path A always assumes that current income could drop at any moment, so you maintain a large enough reserve to avoid depending on short-term cash flow. You do not place all your trust in the idea that you will keep making as much money as before. Path B relies more heavily on the ability to generate future income. You believe that because of what you have already achieved, you can maintain a high level of cash flow, so you do not prioritize holding a large reserve. You prioritize the experience you can have right now. Both choices make sense if conditions stay the same. But the problem is that conditions never stay the same for very long. Over the next year, both versions of your income begin dropping to a more stable level. The unusually high months are no longer happening like before. Path A barely needs to adjust because your cost structure was never dependent on the good months. You still have money left over every month to keep building, and your assets start producing small but steady returns. Path B starts feeling the change more clearly because your current spending level was built during the high income phase. You can still afford everything, but your surplus almost disappears. You are no longer adding more to your assets. Instead, you begin using the money you already have to maintain the current system. This does not create an immediate problem, but it changes the direction of your cash flow. Instead of rising, it starts moving sideways, and then slowly declines over time. The important thing is that, at this stage, no decision looks wrong. Everything still makes sense when viewed on its own. Path B is not spending money in a reckless way. You are simply living in a way that you believe matches your current position. Path A is not sacrificing too much either. You are still enjoying life, just in a more controlled way. And because neither version is making an obvious mistake, you cannot see that the difference is being built day by day. Not through big choices, but through the structure you have unintentionally created for yourself. One structure gives you flexibility and allows you to adapt when conditions change. The other structure forces you to maintain your current lifestyle even when the cash flow is no longer what it used to be. And over many years, that difference in structure is what decides the outcome, not each individual decision at the moment you made it. The trap is not that you spend money. The trap is that you start attaching your standard of living to a specific version of yourself. Path B does not feel like you are doing anything wrong, because every expense has a clear reason and can be explained. A better living space gives you comfort every day. A better vehicle makes it easier to move around. New experiences make life feel more valuable after an intense period of earning money. Each individual choice makes sense when you look at the moment you made it. There is no obvious warning sign. But the problem begins when all of those choices combine and become a system you have to maintain every month. You are no longer spending money because you want to. You are spending money because you have built a life that requires that level of spending to survive. Every month, You have to pay a fixed amount just to keep everything the same. And when that number becomes large enough, it starts limiting every other choice you have. You cannot easily bring it down, even when your income begins to change, because reducing expenses is no longer just cutting money. It feels like cutting away a part of the life you have gotten used to. This creates a quiet form of pressure that you do not notice right away. You can still pay every bill. You are still living steadily. You still have money in your account, so you have no reason to change. This is the feeling of false safety. You believe you are still in control, while in reality, your cash flow has already started moving in the opposite direction. Your surplus is no longer growing. It is slowly being eaten away over time. Each month, only a small amount disappears, so it does not feel dangerous. You still think everything is fine because nothing has collapsed. Path A does not fall into this state because you never let your lifestyle move beyond your ability to control it. You keep your expenses at a level that can be adjusted. You do not let them become fixed obligations. You always keep the right to change when needed. You can reduce expenses without disrupting your entire life because you never built that life to fully depend on a high level of spending. The next difference is in how both versions make new decisions. Path B starts judging every choice based on your current lifestyle. You ask whether something fits the life you have now, instead of asking whether it is sustainable over the long term. This makes each new decision reinforce the current spending system and makes that system harder to change over time. Path A takes the opposite approach. You do not let your current lifestyle lead your future. You let financial control decide your next choices. You prioritize flexibility over the feeling of upgrading. You accept not maximizing your experience in the present so you can keep more options in the future. The important thing is that, at this stage, there is no clear difference in outside results. Both versions are still living well. Both are not in crisis. Both can look at their own lives and think everything is fine. And that stability is the most dangerous part of the trap, because it makes you feel no need to change before a real problem appears. You are not forced to adjust, so you continue maintaining the current system without questioning it. But in reality, the problem has already started forming. It is just growing so slowly that you do not notice. Month by month, a small piece is lost. Decision by decision, a little flexibility disappears. And by the time it becomes big enough for you to see, most of your choices have already been limited by the same decisions you once believed were completely reasonable. At that point, you are no longer choosing. You are only maintaining what you built earlier and trying to keep it from falling apart. After 1 year passes, the difference starts to show, but it is still not big enough to feel dangerous. Path A looks back at the situation and sees that everything is still under control. Your total net worth has increased slightly because of steady accumulation and small returns from the money you allocated earlier. There is no massive jump, but there is also no major decline. Every month, you still keep a stable surplus of a few $1,000s. And that number keeps adding up over time. You do not need to change your lifestyle because the structure you built from the beginning already fits your current income level. Meanwhile, Path B also looks at your life and feels like everything is still fine. You can still pay your expenses. You can still maintain the living environment and the comforts you have built. There is no visible sign of crisis. But one small change starts happening, and you do not notice it. Your monthly surplus is almost gone. Your income and expenses are starting to move very close to each other. Some months, you still have money left over. Other months, you have to use the money you saved earlier to cover the gap. This does not feel dangerous because it does not happen every month, and the money you already have is still enough to cover those small shortfalls. The biggest difference at this stage is not the size of your net worth. It is the direction of your cash flow. Path A still has positive cash flow, which means every month you continue adding more, even if it is not a huge amount. Path B starts moving into a nearly break-even or slightly negative position, which means your total money is no longer growing. It is starting to stay flat, or slowly decline. What matters is that both versions can still look at their lives and think everything is normal. Path A does not feel like you are sacrificing too much because you are still living more comfortably than before the breakthrough. Path B does not feel like there is a problem either because you are still maintaining your current lifestyle without interruption. The next difference is the feeling of control. Path A feels like you have options because you can change your expenses at any time without turning your life upside down. You can raise your spending when needed and lower it when you want without facing a major obstacle. Path B slowly starts losing that feeling, but you do not realize it. You cannot easily reduce your expenses because most of them have become fixed obligations. You can cut a few small things, but you cannot change the entire structure without seriously affecting your day-to-day life. This makes every financial decision more limited, even if you do not notice it right away. On top of that, psychology starts playing a major role. Path B tends to keep everything the same because changing it would feel like a loss. You do not want to go back to a lower standard of living because that would feel like admitting the previous phase was only temporary. Path A does not have this problem because you never pushed your lifestyle too high in the first place, so there is nothing major to cut back. You simply keep maintaining the system you already built. At the 1-year mark, the difference is still not large enough to create an obvious gap, but the direction is already completely different. One side continues building a foundation step by step. The other side begins maintaining a system that is no longer creating new value. And the most dangerous part is that both versions fail to notice that difference early enough to change direction. After 3 to 5 years, the difference is no longer hidden in small changes that are hard to notice. It starts showing up clearly in numbers you can actually see. Path A enters this stage with a foundation that was already built earlier. Your total net worth has grown over time, not through sudden jumps, but through steady accumulation, combined with returns from the money you allocated before. You may have crossed the $1 million mark fairly early, and you continue moving closer to $2 million without needing one major event to happen. What matters is that you are no longer fully dependent on active income. Part of your assets has started producing a small stream of cash flow, which reduces the pressure to keep earning constantly. Your spending still stays within a controllable range, so you do not need to make major adjustments when your income moves up or down. You can choose how much you want to work. You can even pause for a period of time without disrupting your life. Meanwhile, Path B enters this stage with a financial structure that was already locked in. Your income is no longer like it was in the early years. It has become more stable, but it is also much lower than it was during the explosive phase. Your expenses, however, are still high because most of them have become long-term obligations that you cannot change quickly. You begin using the assets you built earlier to cover the months when income falls short. At first, this happens very slowly and does not feel noticeable. Each month, only a small amount disappears, so it does not feel urgent. You still feel like everything is under control because you still have money. But when that pattern continues for years, the total decline becomes harder to ignore. You are no longer building more. You are slowly spending down what you already had. The gap keeps widening as time starts having a stronger effect. Path A benefits from keeping assets in steady growth channels. The returns are not perfectly consistent in every period, but they create an upward trend over the long term. You do not need to predict every single market move correctly because you have already placed yourself in a position that benefits from time. Path B does not have the same advantage because most of your money is tied up in assets that do not create cash flow or locked inside expenses that do not generate returns. You are not getting meaningful growth from what you are holding, so the entire system depends on your current income. The biggest difference at this stage is how each version reacts when conditions change. Path A can adjust expenses, pause certain activities, or slow down your lifestyle without damaging your quality of life too much. You have multiple ways to adapt when circumstances shift. You are not forced to maintain an expensive, fixed lifestyle, so you keep your options open. Path B is much more restricted. You cannot reduce most of your costs because they are tied to long-term commitments like housing, transportation, and the environment you have built around yourself. You can cut a few smaller expenses, but not enough to change the whole picture. This makes even small income changes matter much more than they did before. And this is not only financial, it is psychological. You begin feeling pressure even though no specific event has happened. You realize that to maintain your current lifestyle, you must continue earning at a certain level. That creates a type of dependence you did not have before. You no longer feel as free as you did in the beginning, even though, technically, you still have money. Path A does not experience the same shift because you never pushed your lifestyle too high in the first place. So you do not have to come back down. You simply keep maintaining the system you built and allow it to grow over time. By year 5, the gap is large enough to see when you place both outcomes side by side. One version owns growing assets and has the ability to create more value over time. The other version maintains the same lifestyle, but the assets are slowly declining, and the entire system depends on active income. What matters is that there was no crash. No major event explains the whole process. No single moment can be pointed to as the cause. Everything happened in a very normal way: reasonable expenses, decisions that seemed right at the time, choices that made sense in each individual moment. But when those choices are repeated for years, they create two completely different trajectories. And when you look back, you finally realize that this difference did not appear all at once. It was built very early, step by step, through individual choices that were small enough to ignore, but repeated long enough to create a gap you can almost no longer close once you finally notice it. After 10 years, the difference is no longer a small gap between two lifestyles. It becomes two completely separate lives. Path A is no longer stuck chasing income the way you once were, because by this point your assets have grown large enough to create their own financial foundation. Your net worth could realistically approach or even pass $5 million if you stayed disciplined for years and never broke the original structure you built. But the most important part is not the number itself. It's the fact that you no longer depend entirely on constantly showing up, working nonstop, posting content, or holding people's attention just to maintain your life. You can choose how you want to live instead of feeling trapped inside an identity you created years ago. Your monthly expenses are still manageable and only take up a small percentage of your total wealth. If you want a quieter life, you can slow down without everything collapsing. If you want to start a new project, you have enough time to experiment without immediately worrying about money. You no longer feel the need to prove you're still relevant. You don't need to recreate the viral moment. You don't need to chase attention at any cost. Because at this stage, your real advantage is no longer fame, it's freedom of choice. Path B, on the other hand, doesn't collapse overnight. Life just slowly fades over time. You don't disappear in a single day. There's no dramatic morning where you wake up and realize everything is gone. The process is much slower than that, much more ordinary. And that's exactly why it's harder to notice while it's happening. At first, you simply appear less often. Then the income starts shrinking. A few expenses have to be cut. Some plans get pushed back. Things that once felt easy to afford now require thought. Most of the original money has already been burned maintaining a high lifestyle, and what remains is no longer large enough to generate meaningful cash flow. Eventually, you fall back into depending on active income again. But now the energy is different. The market is different. The opportunities are different. The audience attention that once came so easily is no longer there. And the hardest part is that you still remember exactly what it felt like to have money, to have options, to believe you had entered an entirely different level of life. So when things start shrinking, it doesn't feel like a reasonable adjustment. It feels like losing a piece of yourself. You move somewhere cheaper, you cut expenses, you sell a few things, you stop certain habits. But every step feels heavier than the numbers on paper, because what you're really cutting away is not just spending. It's the identity you once believed you had become. What's interesting is that there was never one massive moment explaining how everything ended this way. No scandal, no market crash, no obvious reckless decision you can point to and say, that's where it all started. It was just years of reasonable choices repeated over and over again. A slightly better apartment, a nicer car, a trip that felt deserved, another expense to maintain the lifestyle, another promise to yourself that next month you'll balance everything out. Individually, every decision felt small, but together, they slowly erased the flexibility you once had. By year 10, the biggest difference between these two versions of your life is no longer money itself. It's the ability to choose. Path A can decide whether to work or not work, where to live, how to spend, whether to disappear quietly or start over again without money forcing the decision. Path B has to make most decisions based on limitations. You stop asking yourself what you truly want first. Instead, you ask whether you can still afford it. And that is the moment where the two lives become completely separated. One person used the explosive years to buy time. The other used them to buy a lifestyle. At first, those two things look almost identical, because both feel better than the life you had before. But after 10 years, the outcomes are completely different. Time gives you freedom. Lifestyle demands continuous payment just to survive. And when you finally look back, the coldest realization is not that the money disappeared. It's that the outcome was decided much earlier than you thought during the most ordinary months, when you still believed you were fully in control. The difference between these two outcomes does not come from one massive decision. It comes from small behaviors, repeated over long periods of time. Path A never has one breakthrough moment that determines the entire result. Instead, it's built on a consistent chain of decisions moving in the same direction year after year. You are not obsessed with maximizing profits at every moment. Your focus is on keeping most of the value you create. Every month, you maintain a clear gap between income and spending instead of allowing the two numbers to move too close together. At first, that gap feels small and almost insignificant, but when maintained consistently, it slowly turns into stable, accumulated capital. That capital gets placed into assets capable of growing over time. Nothing overly complicated, just enough to compound steadily. The returns are then reinvested and allowed to grow again. In the short term, the process feels almost boring. There's no emotional high attached to it, but over the long run, it creates a system that expands on its own. Path B does not fail because of one obvious mistake. It simply reacts naturally to changing circumstances. When income increases, you allow your lifestyle to upgrade with it. When money comes in, you use it to improve your experience of life. And while everything is going well, there seems to be no reason to hold too much back because you believe the cash flow will continue. Over time, the gap between income and expenses slowly shrinks. Savings are no longer stable and begin changing from phase to phase. When income is high, spending rises with it. When income falls, you still try to maintain most of the lifestyle because you've already adapted to it emotionally. As a result, your assets never have enough time to fully accumulate and grow. The next major factor is compound interest. Path A benefits from it because you keep your assets invested long enough for compounding to actually matter. The returns do not need to be extraordinary every single year. But when gains are continuously reinvested and allowed to generate more gains, the difference becomes massive over time. Path B never fully benefits from compounding because most of the money keeps getting pulled out for spending. The capital never stays in place long enough to grow into something larger. Another important factor is cost structure. Path A keeps expenses flexible, meaning you always have room to adjust when necessary. You are never trapped into maintaining a lifestyle that is permanently too expensive. Path B builds life around fixed costs instead. Slowly, flexibility disappears. It becomes harder to scale down when income changes, and because of that, every financial shift starts carrying more pressure. Then there's decision-making itself. Path A does not allow short-term emotions to control long-term financial behavior. Spending decisions are tied to maintaining control and sustainability, not to proving success in the moment. Path B connects spending to present-day experience and the feeling of matching a certain status or identity. Individually, none of those decisions feel wrong, but repeated enough times, they create a direction that becomes increasingly difficult to escape. And the most important part is that none of these factors create dramatic differences immediately. Every individual action feels small. Every decision sounds reasonable. There are no warning signs large enough to force you to stop and rethink everything. But when repeated for years, they create two completely different systems. One system reinforces itself and expands over time. The other slowly drains its own ability to accumulate wealth. And when you finally look back, you do not see one catastrophic mistake. You see a long chain of ordinary decisions quietly leading you toward an outcome you never fully noticed while it was happening. You never realize you're changing direction while it's happening. You only see it once you've already gone far enough away from where you started. And it usually doesn't happen through one major decision. It happens during ordinary days, when you're simply living in ways that feel reasonable at the time. You don't lose your advantage through one obvious mistake. You lose it through small adjustments. One upgrade because you felt you deserved it. One extra expense because you believed you could easily earn it back. One moment where you chose enjoyment now and told yourself you'd balance things out later. Every individual decision has logic behind it. Nothing feels extreme. Nothing feels dangerous. There are no warning signs big enough to make you stop and reevaluate your entire life. And because of that, you continue repeating the pattern without realizing you're already moving along a trajectory that was quietly forming beneath you. The difference between the two outcomes is not about who was smarter or luckier. It comes down to how those behaviors were maintained over time. One person protected the gap between income and spending, which meant there was always something left over to build, invest, and grow. The other slowly allowed that gap to shrink until eventually there was nothing meaningful left to keep. And when you finally look back, you cannot point to one specific moment where everything changed. You only realize that you had been moving in the same direction for years without noticing it. The hardest part to accept is not the money that disappeared. It's the realization that you can't go back to the beginning and choose differently, because the outcome you're living now was never created by one decision. It was created by hundreds of small choices, repeated over time. And once you understand that, you also realize there is no single action capable of fixing everything overnight. The system you live inside today is the result of what you repeatedly did yesterday, which means the only thing truly left is not searching for one perfect decision. It's recognizing that the habits you repeat every month will continue creating the same future whether you pay attention to them or not. And that is the one part you can still change if you recognize it early enough.